Professor Wildman. What are you going to talk about today with this to the seminar?
I'm going to be talking about a topic that's been one of my primary fields of investigation over the last few years, and that is the implications of a shift towards a server-based architecture that primarily uses the internet, but perhaps other channels, to deliver all sorts of media content. And what I hope, what I think I will establish, in speaking to students and other people that are sitting in, is that any media system is structured. The structure of that system is influenced greatly by the nature of the distribution system it utilizes. And as we move to an internet-based or a server network-based distribution architecture, it gives rise to a very different logic of media market organization, as well as media product and service design. And it has implications for the options that policymakers will have, as well as just for the kinds of services we're going to see. And to sort of be real brief, I'm looking at constraints in the system. I'm an economist, so we always think about constraints. And if we think about what kind of content and how much content we have with, say, the traditional television system, and by that I'm including our satellite services, cable, the MVPD services, as well as over-the-air broadcasting, you have a number of channels, and those channels are limited in number. They've been growing in number, but still they're limited in number. They're limited because they're expensive. And so there's a cost to being able to add more content options. And what that means then is people that own a channel have a high opportunity cost associated with putting on something that doesn't draw an audience, because what you lose is the profits of an audience that could be there if you have better content. And in that case, they spend tremendous amounts of resources trying to sort through and weed through options, and it becomes something of a funnel. It goes from many ideas down to a number of trial projects, down to the number of channels, and then it goes to your local distributor. And take, for example, a cable company. The cable company then aggregates that all on your set-top box and offers you the options you subscribe to through basically your TV set and your remote. Right? It's a very, very different system when we move to server-based distribution, because the real constraint on capacity with server-based distribution is really video server capacity. And video server capacity is extremely cheap. If it weren't, you wouldn't have billions and billions of videos that are stored on YouTube, most of which are not watched anymore. It's more expensive to take them off, to take them off than to just leave them there. When you've basically eliminated the cost constraint of adding more content, the incentive then is to proliferate content rather than to restrict it. And what we see is so we can have something like a YouTube or a Netflix, where the set of options that are available are just vastly greater than you'd ever have at any one time on a traditional system. Now, that means the gatekeeping obligations are very different. Somebody won't sit there and go through every one and say, well, it'll attract an audience, because the cost of putting something on that doesn't attract an audience is very small. You've got millions or billions of other options. Somebody will move to the next option. You'll capture that audience one way or another. Right, so put more on and let the audience do the sorting, as opposed to doing all this pre-sorting that networks do now. And so we can look at what YouTube does, giving people options for sorting through videos, channels, and so on, as ways of helping people do their own sorting. It's a very different system, a different set of gatekeepers. In fact, the gatekeeping is not what we traditionally consider to be gatekeeping. It also means something else, that the primary reason for the existence of networks now is they sequence things in a time-based manner, right? One program follows another in an organized sequence. That's really the only reason networks exist. Once we move to server-based distribution, it's point and click. Right? You find something, you click on it, you've got your own channel, and you're basically moving your own dedicated personal channel among the options. And so channel capacity is not a constraint. If you have one channel, you have all the channels you need. Right? In that case, what you should be doing then is offering people a menu rather than a sequence. And so I sort of see networks as perhaps not fully realizing it, but being the last big dinosaurs in the media universe, that we're moving towards something in the next 10 or 15 years where the traditional justification for networks disappears and something more appropriate to the environment we're moving into with point and click will emerge. And
What about the impact on the public? Will this be the dream of greater diversity and every minority interest being able to be served, or is it going to be much more concentration and
well,
reduction?
there's sort of a yes and a no side to this, and I'm an economist, so I've got to have two hands, right? In the sense that that content will be available that addresses almost any possible interest, it'll be there. There's very low cost of putting it on, but if it attracts a small audience, it probably won't be produced with much of a budget either. The bigger issue is more of the exposure side of diversity. When we think about diversity, we think of the amount of, the diverseness of the content that's available. We also think of diversity of exposure. And a lot of our policies now, with traditional television, address both. We try to make sure that people offer kinds of content that might not be there otherwise. And we also try to make it force, and this works best with broadcasters, where they're dependent upon a license. And so you can say, if you don't program as the government wants, right, as public policy dictates, then you stand the possibility of losing a license. And so you have a fair amount of leverage in that way to force broadcast networks to put on children's programming, for example, in the morning. We lose those levers, though, when we move to content to server-based distribution, because there's no tangible facility that you have to have, you can identify. It's not even geographically specific. And so it's hard to identify the lever. And furthermore, if you impose a restriction on one provider, well, you're going to find somebody else showing up slightly different that doesn't meet the definition but doing the same thing. And so we lose those options. And what I will talk about today is saying maybe what we should move towards is ways of making sure people know about it, perhaps through other channels. So the stuff we want people to consume, we make sure they know about it, they know how to find it. So we're basically trying to ease the ability to both recognize and access the stuff we would like people to consume. And
does that mean less regulation in the future, or is it going to be actually more difficult but more prominent to regulate this new media environment?
Will be tied to some extent. There's things that worked in the past. We just don't have the tangible infrastructure and the control over that infrastructure that makes it possible to do the things we used to do. When everything is out there, I can't imagine saying that, for example, take the restrictions, I forget the name of it, the safe haven we used to have for broadcast programming, that certain kinds of content can't be broadcast except in the middle of the night. There are periods when children too young to actually appreciate the content would actually be up and might watch it. All right, so that was sort of a broadcasting safe haven. I can't imagine something that is equivalent to that on the internet. When everything is there are always circuitous ways of getting to it. Now you can do things like have parental filters, and so you can give parents the option, but we've got that already with current TV when we have the logos at the top of the screen, which I never even saw them there until Brad Greenberg pointed them out to me. But they're there, and to the extent that parents want to look at those as a guide to what their children might watch, they do so. My understanding is it isn't used very much. We can do the same thing on the internet, maybe even better by actually imposing filters. And so if you do have a code, then perhaps it can be filtered by code, although how you're going to get billions and billions of videos out there filtered according to a code is something that is beyond me. I suppose if we can impose subtitling requirements on online video, and we're moving towards that, then perhaps we can impose some sort of a coding requirement as well. That's going to require a whole new infrastructure, though, because who's going to rate this stuff? So it's going to be a really challenging environment to meet traditional goals of sort of content-based policy for the media.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.